Warning! This video is going to be pretty rough. I'm going to be talking about some really lousy people, so content warning for bigotry, fascism, and just general skeeziness. Also, the people I'm going to be talking about here are famous for targeted harassment, doxing, and other destructive tactics against their enemies, so I'm begging you, please do not harass anyone that I mention in this video, really. Please. Hello and welcome to the ancient and beautiful Temple of Literature, one of my favorite places in Hanoi, formerly the National University of Vietnam. The Temple of Literature is now a public shrine to knowledge, education, and wisdom. And if you want to learn more about the Temple of Literature, highly recommend you check out my partner Luna's channel, Luna Oi. She gives a full tour of this amazing place. Really is just gorgeous. So go check that out. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. But the reason that I'm here today is I thought that this would be a fitting setting for today's topic, the search for truth in the face of distorted facts, false narratives, and outright lies. Specifically, we'll be discussing the lies of a group of grifters who call themselves American Patriot Socialists and who drape themselves in American flags. Hang out with TERFs.
This transgender ideology is pure idealism. It says, if I feel something, it's true. We've all got our own reality.
And every once in a while, get caught driving young women into poverty, forcing them into a cult, and then sexually abusing them. It's going to be a wild ride, so buckle in. I don't want to talk about this shit, but I think things are coming to a head, and it's time we address these people. Look at the dragonfly on my shoulder. Hello. We have been blessed by a dragonfly here at the Temple of Literature. I guess he's just going to hang out there. Okay, that's fine with me. So the American Patriot Socialists worship crypto-fascist figures like Lyndon LaRouche and Nick Land.
This is kind of what defines the nature of my patriotism intellectually and theoretically. I gave it to you, right? You don't have to talk about LaRouche and Dugin and, you know, Nick Land. I mean, those people all influenced me.
And if you aren't familiar with those names, count yourself lucky. Lyndon LaRouche was a fascist who did hideous mind control experiments under the alias Lynn Marcus. Really nasty stuff. There's a lot more to LaRouche and his devious ideology, which started sort of leftist, but has really gone far right through his life. He's gone now. We still got that dragonfly. Oh, there he goes. LaRouche is an ugly dude. Fortunately, no longer with us. As for Nick Land, he is another neo-fascist. He's a guy who developed much of the quote-unquote dark enlightenment philosophy, which underpins the alt-right movement and which seeks to accelerate capitalism towards fascism. Land believes some really weird shit. For instance, that races should be separated under the belief that elites will enhance their IQs by associating only with each other. Alexander Dugin is another figure that the AmPatSocs are obsessed with. He's a Russian fascist and ultranationalist who was a staunch anti-communist in the 1980s Soviet Union and founder of the National Bolshevik Party, so like literally one of the OG Nazbols. Now, has attempted some pretty impressive rhetorical backflips to make it sound like Dugin's fascism is the real socialism.
The only reason Dugin is trying to search for some authentic, ideal kernel within fascism against its actual historical manifestation is because, in his view, at this time, to quote, there are, in the 20th century, only 3 ideologies that have managed to demonstrate that their principles are realistic in terms of their political implementation: liberalism, communism, and fascism. Others are absent and are impossible. In Russia, we have passed the 2 ideological stages, communist and liberal. What remains is fascism. So he's just using the word fascism to describe something that's neither the Soviet version of communism nor Western liberalism. And if you actually read the text, that word has nothing to do with its actual, real, historical reality. Something he pretty much acknowledges even in that piece. Dugin is using this word as a stand-in for the ideal of a socialism that, to quote, will be more rural than proletarian, more communal than cooperative, than administrative, more regionalistic than centralistic. All of these are requirements of Russian national specificity, which will find its expression in the doctrine and not only in practice.
Of course, this isn't new at all. In fact, this is exactly how Michael Parenti defines fascism in his outstanding book, Black Shirts and Reds. Parenti notes that the essential defining characteristic of fascism is the staging of a pseudo-revolution, which mimics many of the trappings and aesthetics of socialist revolution without actually threatening capitalism. Mussolini and Hitler both tried to appeal to the working class by using popular socialist symbols and language. As Parenti writes, the Nazi Party's full name was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, a left-sounding name. Both the Italian fascists and the Nazis made a conscious effort to steal the left's thunder. There were mass mobilizations, youth organizations, work brigades, rallies, parades, banners, symbols, and slogans. There was much talk about a Nazi revolution that would revitalize society, sweeping away the old order and building the new. Of course, these are all false promises. As Parenti explains, fascism is a false revolution. It cultivates the appearance of popular politics and a revolutionary aura without offering a genuine revolutionary class content. It propagates a new order while serving the same old moneyed interests. Its leaders are not guilty of confusion, but of deception. That they work hard to mislead the public does not mean that they themselves are misled. And this is exactly what Haas is doing here, as he presents the obvious fascist ideology of Dugin and then tries to stuff it into a communism-shaped costume. No, guys, seriously, he's just using the word fascism, but he really means communism. Give me a break. And if you look at Dugin's defining characteristics of fascism in his own definition, which insists is really just a stand-in for socialism, you'll see that none of these characteristics, being rural, being communal, being regionalistic, are incompatible with fascism. In fact, these are all principles which fascists constantly push since the beginning. The Nazis idolized ruralism. They presented themselves as communal, and they were super regionalistic in how they defined Aryan culture, after all. But what's expressly lacking from Dugin's ideology is class character. I mean, Dugin says specifically that his fascism is not proletarian in nature. It's right there on the fucking screen on Haz's stream. It is not rooted in the working class. It does not have a proletarian nature. This is not Marxism. Dugin does not call for the elimination of capitalism. He does not call for the uniting of the working class. So in what way is this socialism or communism? It's not. It's just fascism. And Haz is using a lot of cheap rhetorical tricks here to try to rebrand and dress up fascism as communism, which is what fascists always do. And this is actually a really pathetic attempt at doing this if you pay any attention to what Haz is actually saying here. It's remarkable that anyone buys this shit at all. And the American Patriot Socialists are enamored with Nick Land and Lyndon LaRouche. You will see them being name-dropped and referenced all over the place if you check out the villainous hive mind of the American Patriot Socialists on Twitter or YouTube. And prominent American Patriot Socialist thought leaders have name-dropped them on many occasions.
I accuse communism and liberalism to be racist. At the same time, not biological or cultural, or I think that universalism is a kind of race.
What does LaRouche, Dugin, Nick Land, and, I guess whatever fascist boogeyman they make up, what do all of these things have in common? Why are Marxists so insecure in Marxism that they feel like every time someone is stepping outside of the bounds of institutional Marxism, there's some secret nefarious, ideal core that is motivating this person, that's some kind of secret. And I'm telling you what I am. I'm telling you where I'm coming from. The thinking spirit, our minds, our soul even, I would say, is striving and longing for a sense of meaning that is worthy of that universal state. What is the universal truth of history? What is the universal truth of being? There you can get Heidegger, who asks the question of being. That's just one variant, right? What is the truth of universal history and its striving? That's how Kojève reconciled Hegel and Heidegger, because that's Hegel, the teleology of history, right? That's what Hegel's dealing with. The development of spirit. Where does that culminate to? Thank you, Dimitri.
American leftists are extremely ideologically insecure, so they have to take everything outside of their institutional politics to some absurd extreme.
Yeah, you're right, Dimitri. Thank you. Thank you all. That is solid. Appreciate you. In this universal state, we are inherently disposed. We are inherently longing for an equally universal sense of meaning that permeates across the whole of history. We want an explanation for what history was. Now, people say, well, Haas, what about Marxism, which describes the class struggle? We have achieved the end of history. We are living in a post-historical world. But the class struggle is an abstraction. It's not a determinate, like, meta-historical narrative underpinning the whole of history. It's not an ontological understanding. It's not encompassing in its universality in terms of the universal state. It belongs to... The class struggle doesn't really give us any meaning. See, all history being a history of class struggle doesn't make history meaningful. It doesn't. So, I'll begin with Larouche. Larouche has his idea of the oligarchic principle and the republican principle. And this takes the form of expression and thought of Aristotle versus Plato for Larouche. And these two tendencies have been struggling with one another across the whole fabric of history. And guess what? Larouche is right. That pattern is there. That is a very observable pattern, right? The way in which the oligarchic tendency versus the kind of republican, or let's call it the principle of the emperor / the republic versus the oligarchy. Yeah, that's a very clear pattern in history. It is, okay? So he's onto something there. Also, with Aristotle versus Plato, he's also onto something very clearly. LaRouche has a very coherent, universal, all-encompassing worldview. It's not nonsense. It's not schizo nonsense. It's not some cult or whatever where people just believe in it because of his authority. No, he has a very coherent worldview.
The wannabe cult leaders of the AmPatSoc movement have recently launched the most cringe psyop I've seen on the internet, and that's really saying something, in the form of what they call MAGA Communism. Basically, they're making the case that Marxists should unite with MAGA fascists to overthrow the elite globalists, as they say. And boy howdy, if you don't hear the anti-Semitic dog whistle, perhaps you should clean out your dog ears. Or maybe you just lived a normal life and you don't spend your time digging through fascist spaces on the internet like I do, in which case I envy you. But anyway, that's definitely an anti-Semitic dog whistle, especially the way it's being used and the concepts it's being used in conjunction with. It's definitely an anti-Semitic dog whistle. That's what they're doing. They're saying socialists should team up with fascists to get rid of the Jews. It's very, very disgusting. Of course, they give themselves just enough plausible deniability to skirt the issue if they're ever pressed on it. But come the fuck on. We all know who they mean when they say elite globalists. I mean, just look at this clip in which LA Looks enthusiast Jackson Hinkle tries to defend his incessant use of the term.
Globalism embodies the, one world sentiment of, and it actually kind of relates back to this whole patriotic socialism debate. It refers to the idea of like one world centralization of all energy markets, of all, national boundaries, erasing national boundaries, erasing peoples, erasing histories, and kind of bringing it all under one Western cohesion. And that's what the West is trying to do. That's what the EU is. That's what NATO is. That's what the World Economic Forum and Davos is. It is kind of a catch-all word for, all of these sorts of things, whatever you want to call it. There's different aspects of it.
Globalism, that means different things to different people. That's why right-wingers use it, because they're like, we're going to fight the globalists, even though they're an imperialist. They could be imperialists, they can be capitalists, but they go on Fox News like, we got to fight the globalists, because some people that means shutting down the border. Some people mean, oh, that means we got to be isolationist. Some people mean that mean fighting anti-imperialism. So it kind of give off the impression that you don't want that. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I don't think it's vague at all. I think that using terms, and a specific term that you could use that rises above capitalism, for example, is techno-feudalism. Now, that's a phrase that is embodied within globalism, and I think is representative of the term globalism. I think that's fair. And it is different than just capitalism. And again, you hear any of these people, any of these leftist intellectuals discuss techno-feudalism, it is encompassing all of the issues that we refer to as globalism. But the average American, the average person, is not going to be able to understand nor resonate with the term techno-feudalism. If you say that we need to fight against techno-feudalism, that in all honesty is more vague and ambiguous to most people in the country than, say, fighting against globalism. Globalism is a far more culturally relevant term than saying techno-feudalism. So I think if you want to have high-level conversations that are going to be out of touch for the masses of the country, then sure, refer to it in the very, very, very specific, out of touch phrases and terms that you want to refer to it in, but it's not going to resonate with anyone. And on my program, I try to resonate with as many people as possible and expose what's really going on with the globalists.
What the F is Hinkson Jackhole talking about? If you are a Marxist and your problem is with capitalists and capitalism, then just say that the problem is capitalists and capitalism. What the hell makes you think that the word globalist is going to resonate with the normal people of the USA? Normal people don't talk like that. They don't go around complaining about those globalist elites, and they don't drop Nazi dog whistles all the time. The only person I've ever heard talk like that in real life is my racist uncle after guzzling a handle of Fireball at Thanksgiving. And notice the rhetorical trickery here. The interviewer, Nick, asks him why he doesn't just talk about capitalism, why he has to use the word globalism. Then Hinkle himself introduces this phrase techno-feudalism, and then he uses this to deflect from Nick's actual question, which is why he doesn't use the word capitalism, and he does use the word globalism. That was the original question. And it's just a complete dodge of the question. And then, basically Hinkle just argues with himself for a few seconds.
Yeah, I don't think it's vague at all. I think that using terms, and a specific term that you could use that rises above capitalism, for example, is techno-feudalism. Now, that's a phrase that is embodied within globalism, and I think is representative of the term globalism. I think that's fair. And it is different than just capitalism.
If you want to talk about the specific stage of capitalism we're currently in, the prevailing form of capitalism which relies on global imperialism to eradicate indigenous cultures, enforce social agendas through the free market mechanisms, just say neoliberalism. We already have a fucking word for that. It's a perfectly fine word that doesn't make people think you're a freaking anti-Semite. There's no reason to insist on using these fucking dog whistles unless you're trying to dog whistle. Old Stinkhole even had a nice cozy chat with great replacement theory advocate Tucker Carlson to trash anti-fascism.
His handlers and his cronies are prepping the CIA, the FBI, Antifa, the IRS, and now Ministry of Truth to attack freedom-loving Americans.
And of course, he managed to squeeze off a nice little anti-Semitic dog whistle while he was there. The Great Reset, the Nazi conspiracy theory about how Jew George Soros and the Jewish World Economic Forum are controlling all the governments of the world along with all the other Jews.
Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Joe Biden are controlled by the same exact people. They're controlled by individuals like George Soros and controlled by people like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, and they're going to do whatever they want.
Okay, here's another rabbit hole that's pretty deep. I'm not going to go into it completely. You can do your own research if you want. There is a shitty program called The Great Reset that's been put forth by the World Economic Forum. Again, that's the shitty neoliberal organization that I'm not defending. Basically, the Great Reset is just a par-for-the-course neoliberal agenda for achieving social goals through free market mechanisms. Run-of-the-mill neoliberalism. If you want a better idea of what I'm talking about, I recommend John the Duncan's video on authoritarian neoliberalism. But anyway, there's nothing good about the Great Reset. It's not cool, but there's nothing that remarkable about it either. It's just yet another shitty neo-lib think tank white paper. It sucks, I'm not in favor of it, it's capitalist trash, end of story, right? Well, fascists have transformed it into the Great Reset conspiracy theory, and of course they've turned it into an unhinged anti-Semitic fever dream of Nazi panic and fabrication. In the Great Reset conspiracy theory, Jewish globalist elites are using COVID-19 and other crises to institute a new world order which includes, wait for it, ending capitalism. That's right, ending capitalism. That's right, the Great Reset conspiracy theory that Hinkle is pushing is a MAGA fascist doomsday scenario in which Jewish people force communism on the world. It's an anti-communist conspiracy theory because MAGATs are anti-communist. The notion of allying with MAGATs is fucking ridiculous. And by the way, the Great Reset conspiracy theory is always packaged with references specifically to George Soros and the World Economic Forum. All of these semiotic markers coming together on Tucker Carlson's platform constitutes much more than a mere dog whistle. It's a goddamn blue whale whistle. This is why Nazbol ideology is so wacky and fucked up, because they smash together completely conflicting worldviews in the most self-contradictory way possible in the name of some weird fucking demagogic bullshit, cynical grift. These dudes are trotting out some heinous Nazi rhetoric right before everyone's eyes, but they have the mask pulled on just tightly enough that they can tap dance away from anyone who calls them out with a coy little, oh shucks, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's the game of this. This is why they do what they do. It's also why Nazis and white supremacists like these kinds of figures, because it gives them lulls. It gives them permission to do Nazi shit right out in public in such a way that they can get away with it. It normalizes fascist narratives and softens people up for radicalization to the far right. And it is especially funny to fascists when they manage to rope people into actually falling for this garbage grift of an ideology. And look, I shouldn't have to say this. I don't feel like I have to say this because I think it goes without saying, but I'm not here to defend billionaires and neoliberal think tanks. That's obviously not the point I'm making here. But if you've spent any time at all studying contemporary fascism, you will see this connection immediately, even though, like I said before, today's Nazis are very careful to design their rhetoric to give themselves plenty of plausible deniability, which is exactly what Jerkson Hair Gel is doing here. He's leaving himself a little rat hole to crawl through if anyone dares cry out that the emperor wears Nazi clothes. And pretending to be Marxist enhances the troll. It sets them up for a great feint attack. In response to any criticism from the left, they can say, oh, I thought you were communist. Why are you defending George Soros? He's a billionaire. Why are you defending a neoliberal organization like the World Economic Forum? We weren't born yesterday. We know what it means when you choose to single out that specific billionaire alongside that specific organization, claiming that they control the governments of the world along with the global elites. I mean, especially when you're doing it on fucking Tucker Carlson's show, for Christ's sakes. We can see what you're doing here. I mean, how much more clear do we have to make it that this is a movement rooted in bigotry and fascistic jingoism? Do we have to show you the transphobic tweet in which Jackson Hinkle flatly denied the validity of trans men? Or do we have to reference the fact that after being banned from Twitch, he now streams on Cozy.tv, the streaming platform of avowed white supremacist and anti-Semite Nick Fuentes, along with unhinged misogynist Laroucheite Nazbol Two Holes has?
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
How many holes does a woman have from the waist down?
2.
Okay, so what are those holes used for?
Poop and pee?
Where's the sex one, dude?
The pee one. Okay.
Oh my god!
And while we're on the cringe-inducing subject of has, I think it's hilarious that these guys crow about the evils of the World Economic Forum day in and day out, then go on to hang out on shows hosted by associates and advocates of, you guessed it, the World Economic Forum. This is what American Patriot Socialism is really all about. It's reckless ideological nihilism, a complete lack of coherency in principles and worldview, and a seething disdain for truth. sure, there's a lot of hand-waving about leftist values, a lot of surface-level aesthetic stuff. They love to throw around words like imperialism, and they like to LARP as understanders of the working class and Marxism, but there's no legitimate Marxist philosophy to be found anywhere in their ideology whatsoever. Just this weird fever dream of Nazism and American jingoism filtered through a haze of pseudo-Marxist buzzwords and some hand-waving about how hate-filled petty bourgeois Trump supporters are the real working class and we should unite with MAGA to overthrow the Jews. I mean, globalist elites. That's the ticket. I mean, keep in mind, the strategy they're advocating here is to unite with MAGA, to fuse the Marxist movement with the MAGA movement to form a Marxist MAGA megazord. Never mind the fact that these chuds don't even have anything in the way of a political party or organized movement at all, just a bunch of followers on social media who've never accomplished much more than hate-filled raids on Twitch and mass harassment campaigns against minorities on Twitter. Never mind that they have accomplished literally nothing politically except scraping together about as many subscribers as an E-tier unboxing channel on YouTube. A core tenet of Marxist ideology is praxis. We prove our ideology through practice in the real world. Only through actually doing shit can we figure out if our ideas have merit or not. The American Patriot Socialists aren't doing anything. They are literally all talk. They even go so far as to say that organizing is a waste of time. They are fully convinced that tweeting and talking about shit is how you build a revolution. In that sense, they are no different than the debate bros that they claim to hate. And it all runs completely counter to everything that Marx, Engels, Lenin, and all the other framers of Marxist philosophy who they claim to hold up have ever said on the subject. Okay, let's say somehow these are the spokesmen of Marxism, and we follow these fearless leaders down the primrose path of uniting with MAGA. What does that entail exactly? I mean, how do you unite two political movements with expressly opposed political goals? I mean, MAGA is severely anti-communist. They hate communism. They don't want us around. They want to kill us and throw us out of helicopters. What does that even look like? How do you not unite a bunch of pro-capitalist, anti-communist American chauvinists who want the USA to rule the world with communists who want to build towards a stateless, classless society? I mean, it'd be one thing if they were focusing on converting MAGA fascists to Marxism. Like, okay, I have my doubts that it could really work or that it should be a huge priority for communists at this point in time. But okay, I at least see the logic in putting together like a campaign to teach Marxism to dejected working class white folks who supported Trump out of pure desperation and spite for the status quo. That could make sense if that's what they're talking about, but that's not what they're doing at all. They're saying they want to unite with MAGA, and they're doing it by adopting some of the worst characteristics of MAGA fascism, like American chauvinism, anti-Semitism, transphobia, and they aren't, from what I can tell, doing anything to spread actual Marxism to MAGAs. I mean, Hinkle did not mention Marx or the working class struggle or capitalism even once when he went on Tucker Carlson's show. I guess if he's some kind of crypto Marxist, then he's doing a really good job at hiding it. I mean, on the contrary, they don't seem to have even a basic grasp of dialectical materialist principles of development, contradiction, class analysis, any of the basic philosophical elements of Marxism and leftism and communism. I mean, yeah, they really are hiding their power level if they are indeed Marxists at all. I mean, for fuck's sake, Hinkle calls himself a Marxist-Leninist, but directly and fundamentally contradicts Lenin on so many issues. I mean, in The Right of Nations to Self-Determination, Lenin made it clear that he distinguishes between nationalism for an oppressed nation and that of an oppressor nation. He roundly criticized the nationalism of the ruling class of Great Russia while advocating for the right of smaller oppressed nations to secede and to fight for self-determination, and made it clear that repudiation of the right to self-determination, i.e. the right of nations to secede, means nothing more than defense of the privileges of the dominant nation and police methods of administration to the detriment of democratic methods. He also wrote that the ruling class of Russia definitely reject both the equality of nationalities and the right to self-determination. Theirs is the old motto of the days of serfdom, autocracy, orthodoxy, and the national essence, the last term applying only to the great Russian nation. Even the Ukrainians are declared to be an alien people, and their very language is being suppressed. Sounds a lot like what we do to indigenous people in the USA. I mean, Lenin goes on to explain that repudiation of the right to self-determination, i.e. the rights of nations to secede, means nothing more than defense of the privileges of the dominant nation and police methods of administration to the detriment of democratic methods. Lenin also made it clear that workers who live in imperialist nations should not take pride in the imperialist state which rules over them, explaining that there is no pride to be found in a history of attacking and oppressing others, and that nobody is to be blamed for being born a slave, but a slave who not only eschews a striving for freedom, but justifies and eulogizes his slavery. Such a slave is a lickspittle and a bore who arouses a legitimate feeling of indignation, contempt, and loathing. In these passages, Lenin is expressly saying that there is no pride to be found in conquering smaller nations. A direct comparison can be drawn easily between Lenin's condemnation of the subjugation of Ukraine and Poland by the Tsar and the United States subjugation and theft of land from the indigenous people of what we now call the USA, not to speak of the countless bloody and atrocious wars of imperialism which we've waged and are waging against the global South. As Marx and Engels wrote, no nation can be free if it oppresses other nations. And the USA is nothing if not a prison of nations, whether you're referring to the millions of black people who've suffered in privation and indignity since being brought here against their wills as slaves, or the indigenous peoples who even now are viciously oppressed and sequestered on reservations as their native lands are polluted and blighted by settler capitalists. Lenin wrote that Russians cannot defend the fatherland otherwise than by desiring the defeat of the Russian state in any war. This is the lesser evil to 9/10 of the inhabitants of Russia, for Tsarism not only oppresses those 9/10 economically and politically, but also demoralizes, degrades, dishonors, and prostitutes them by teaching them to oppress other nations and to cover up this shame with hypocritical and quasi-patriotic phrases. Sounds exactly like American Patriot Socialism to me. Is this not exactly what the US of A has always done since its very inception? The Stars and Stripes have flown over stolen land since day one, and the core tenets of so-called American ideology are rooted directly in teaching the working class to oppress other nations and to cover up this shame with hypocritical and quasi-patriotic phrases, the very phrases and quasi-patriotism that these AmPatSocs are advocating and pushing day in, day out right now. By the way, if you want to learn more about the difference between chauvinist nationalism and the nationalism of self-determination for the oppressed peoples, check out Luna's video on the subject. It's real good, and there's a link in the description, probably a card somewhere around here as well that you can click on. Anyway, it's plain to see that the American Patriot Socialists conveniently ignore the actual words and ideas of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and all the other revolutionary communists they claim to represent. MAGA communism runs directly counter to Lenin's observation that in advancing the slogan of the international culture of democracy and of the world working class movement, we take from each national culture only its democratic and socialist elements. We take them only and absolutely in opposition to the bourgeois culture and the bourgeois nationalism of each nation. Is it not clear that American Patriot Socialists are doing the exact opposite of what Lenin demanded in these passages by spouting the trashy and bigoted social chauvinist rhetoric of the most reactionary elements of American bourgeois civil society? They're adopting the most reactionary elements of bourgeois culture and the bourgeois nationalism of the USA. And why? Simply so they can appeal to the worst elements of MAGA fascists. Assuming that this isn't all just some big troll or a psyop, I mean, if this whole MAGA communism, American Patriot Socialism shtick is somehow actually sincere, then I can only arrive at one conclusion. These people are really only interested in uniting white cishet people. Just like the debate bros that they're always going after, they only want to unite mostly white men to preserve and uphold power structures of patriarchy, white supremacism, and countless other forms of bigotry. They're fine with dividing off trans workers. That's why they deny that trans men even exist. They're fine with dividing off black folks who aren't comfortable with worshiping the flag of the nation which enslaved and oppressed them for generations. Now, the American Patriot Socialists will, of course, deny this by claiming that those of us who care about things like not being rabid bigots and not further alienating marginalized members of the working class are out of touch with the working class.
I also encourage anyone who refuses to try and connect with the American public and just engage in ultra high level specific language that no one can really resonate with, do it by all means, and try to start a newspaper or start a outlet or start a Twitter feed or something using that language specifically and solely, and see how it goes. I don't think it's going to go well, but prove me wrong. And you know, I don't know. I don't think that really works.
But the class struggle is an abstraction. It's not a determinate,
Ultra
like meta-historical,
high-level specific
narrative underpinning the whole of history.
language that no one can really resonate with.
It's not an ontological understanding.
Language that no one can really resonate with.
Come on, capitalism is not some big word that workers can't understand. Neoliberalism is not a big fancy word. It's incredibly classist to think that workers can't grasp these basic concepts. And we're not the ones obfuscating and muddying the waters when we talk clearly about class conflict, proletarian revolution, neoliberal oppression. The AmPatSocs are the ones who are being incredibly vague and obfuscating and alienating by using these shitty words like globalist elites that only appeal to fascists when they could just be saying, fuck capitalism directly. And this is tailism. If you're not familiar with the term tailism, it's another term coined by Lenin. You see, Lenin didn't think communists should simply follow along behind the working class. But what else is the function of social democracy if not to be a spirit that not only hovers over the spontaneous movement, but also raises this movement to the level of its program? Surely it is not its function to drag at the tail of the movement. At best, this would be of no service to the movement. At worst, it would be exceedingly harmful. Lenin knew that the bourgeoisie ingrained certain reactionary opinions and attitudes into the working class, and that it was the duty of communist revolutionaries to help to educate and elevate our fellow workers, not simply to follow them without question down the lane of bigotry and fascist tendencies. Another argument used by the American Patriot Socialists, I'm tired of saying those words, is that focusing on idpol is somehow a distraction, and we should simply ignore the transphobia, racism, and misogyny of MAGA fascists simply because a lot of them happen to be working class, even though really a lot of them are petty bourgeoisie. Not to say that you can't, have solidarity with petty bourgeoisie people. There were petty bourgeois elements of the revolution in Vietnam. Petty bourgeois interests actually do align with the working class, and it's usually false consciousness that makes them think otherwise, but that's beside the point. The idea that MAGA is a working class movement at all has been completely blown out of the water by hard data. Trump voters had far higher incomes than Biden voters and non-voters. A massive section of the MAGA movement are petty bourgeois. As you can tell just by looking at any pictures of MAGA rallies, these people have some very expensive trucks and guns and shit. And those who are actually working class in the MAGA movement would be what Marx described as bourgeois proletariat. That is, working class people who benefit from imperialism enough that they end up siding with capital against their own interests. If you need evidence that the working class Trump supporters are working against the interests of the working class, I will remind you that they support Trump, who was extremely anti-worker. His policies were anti-worker. He is a billionaire. He is a fascist. And voting for him is a form of class betrayal. It's a fucking self-proving phenomenon. If you are a working class Trump supporter, you are what Marx defined as the bourgeois proletariat. End of discussion. That's not to say that Trump supporters, whether they're working class or petty bourgeoisie, are completely unreachable. A lot of former Trump supporters have moved towards the left, but we don't reach these people by adopting their most reactionary characteristics to try to lure them over with the stink bait of bigotry. This only serves to corrupt and undermine our own movement. It muddies our own message. Our movement must be humanist, progressive, and liberatory in nature, not reactionary, not rooted in bigotry and fascist principles. The best way to win people over to communism, whether they're Trump supporters or not, is by teaching them communism. Because communism reflects reality. It speaks to the problems which people actually face in the real world. Communism speaks to the people in a way that fascism never can, because communism reflects the truth. The idea of trying to win over workers through bigotry against marginalized people is patently absurd. Speaking of marginalized people, LGBTQ+ people now account for over 7% of the population. Now, granted, that's not a super big number yet, but Marxist philosophy is all about seeking a comprehensive and historical perspective and studying development, so let's get some context. First of all, that figure is increasing more rapidly than ever, year by year, thanks to the arduous struggle of our community to make it safer and more socially acceptable for folks to come out. By comparison, let's look at the development of the acceptance of gay marriage in the USA. In 2004, less than 20 years ago, only about 31% of the population favored same-sex marriage. Today, that number is up to 61%, a clear majority. And if they don't support trans workers now because there aren't enough trans people, they wouldn't have supported gay marriage in 2004 because not enough workers supported gay marriage at that time. They're not driven by principles or a coherent libertarian worldview. They are opportunists and demagogues who are driven by a thirst for power and relevancy and money. At any rate, the AmPatSocs have made it clear that they are willing to completely alienate 7% of all workers to pursue a segment of the population that is anti-communist and the least likely to join a communist revolution. And speaking as a non-binary person, as one of the 7% of USA citizens who identifies as LGBTQ+, I have to take issue with the framing that we merely disagree with MAGA fascists on these issues. It goes a lot deeper than that. They want to eradicate us. They don't want us to exist. I mean, it's obvious that we'll have to work with people who we disagree with to build a working class movement. That's a given. And this is a common sophistry tactic that debate bros use all the time. They start with a pretty obvious and rational statement like, we have to reach out to and work with people we disagree with. Then they leap from that nugget of truth to wildly brain-dead conclusions like, we should work with outright bigots. White supremacism, TERF ideology, and fascism go far beyond mere disagreement. And it's just reckless and absurd to suggest that we should be willing to work with and ally with people who want to get rid of us. But the AmPatSocs are willing to work with those people because in truth they share those destructive and bigoted and genocidal goals with MAGA fascists, which is why they're so willing not just to look past their bigotry, but to participate in spreading their bigotry, their MAGA ideology. The MAGA fascists are not aligned with the interests of the working class. They are fascists. This is yet another case in which Lenin would have flatly disagreed. Is it true, Lenin asks, that in general, the economic struggle is the most widely applicable means of drawing the masses into the political struggle? It is absolutely untrue. All and sundry manifestations of police tyranny and autocratic outrage, and not only such as are connected with the economic struggle, are not one whit less widely applicable as a means of drawing in the masses. Lenin then goes on to list a bunch of social, identity-oriented problems, what the AmPatSocs might dismiss as idpol, including the flogging of the peasants, the persecution of the religious sects, and many other similar manifestations of tyranny. Lenin pointed out that such struggles, though not directly connected with the economic struggle, represent in general widely applicable means and occasions for political agitation and for drawing the masses into the political struggle. Lenin continues, of the sum total of the cases in which the workers suffer from tyranny, violence, and lack of rights, undoubtedly only a small minority represent cases of police tyranny in the economic struggle as such. Why then should we beforehand restrict the scope of political agitation by declaring only one of the means to be the most widely applicable, when Social Democrats have, in addition to their generally speaking no less widely applicable means? In other words, he's saying, worry about the other shit that workers worry about. Join workers in all of their struggles against all forms of oppression. It's pretty obvious, and that's why Lenin's right and the AmPatSocs are very wrong here. That's to say, we should be addressing every single form of oppression faced by workers to unite the working class. If we're looking for segments of the working class to pursue and bring into the fold, why should we be going after the most reactionary, bigoted, privileged, and fascistic elements of the working class? The least oppressed, the ones that like capitalism and fascism the most? I can't believe I have to ask these questions. They seem like very silly questions indeed, and yet the American Patriot Socialists bring us down to this level. I realize, of course, that not every single Trump supporter, by the way, is a fascist bigot, but the rhetoric being used by the American Patriot Socialists, it's clearly directed towards the most bigoted and fascistic elements of MAGA fascism. This is tailism, at best, and a fascistic psyop to try and diffuse fascistic ideology into leftist spaces and into our movement at worst. I mean, the AmPatSocs overtly claim that they want to unite with MAGA fascists because they're afraid that our culture in the USA will be homogenized by the globalists.
Globalism embodies the, one world sentiment of, and it actually kind of relates back to this whole patriotic socialism debate. It refers to the idea of like one world centralization of all energy markets, of all, national boundaries, erasing national boundaries, erasing peoples, erasing histories, and kind of bringing it all under one Western cohesion. And that's what the West is trying to do. That's what the EU is. That's what NATO is. That's what the World Economic Forum and Davos is. It is kind of a catch-all word for, all of these sorts of things, whatever you want to call it. There's different aspects of it.
This is, of course, just a regurgitation of the fascist Great Replacement theory, which is itself rooted in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that go all the way back to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a long debunked book that claimed that Jewish people are seeking to eradicate European cultures by taking control of banks and the media and all that kind of shit. And what we're really talking about here isn't uniting the working class to overthrow capitalism. If it was, the AmPatSocs wouldn't spend all their time courting bigots and fascists by adopting their fascist conspiracy theories, which are rooted in culture eradication theories, and none of their time teaching class consciousness or trying to heal the rifts that exist within the working class by actually addressing the concerns of marginalized folks, or, talking about Marxism or class consciousness or attacking capitalism. In point of fact, these bozos are really just staging what Michael Parenti refers to as a false revolution.
Both the Italian fascists and the Nazis made a conscious effort at imitating the left. Youth organizations, mass mobilizations, rallies, parades, banners, symbols, slogans, uniforms. Fascism, in fact, is a false revolution. It makes a revolutionary appeal without making an actual revolution. It propagates the widely proclaimed new order while serving the same old moneyed interests.
In Black Shirts and Reds, Parenti points out that fascists have always co-opted popular leftist messaging and aesthetics to present themselves as heroes of the people, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. MAGA Communism and American Patriot Socialism are just feeble attempts to hide a brown shirt beneath a red cape, following in the footsteps of the great monsters of history.
Now, like with a lot of terms, like liberalism, democracy, socialism, communism, no single definition of fascism maybe will satisfy everybody. And with fascism, there's a really special problem because it's a beguiling mix of revolutionary-sounding mass appeals and reactionary class politics. And the reactionary class politics are the part of fascism that our establishment historians almost never talk about. Hitler's party, for instance, was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or Nazis. It's a very left-sounding name, National Socialist German Workers, and it was designed to win broad support among working people, even while the Nazis were destroying working-class organizations. In other words, fascism, the original Italian and German variations of fascism, was a political phenomenon that made a revolutionary appeal without making a revolution. It promised to solve the ills of the many while in fact protecting the special interests of the few with violence and terror. And it propagated a new political consciousness, a new order, a new nation to serve the same old capitalist system.
Now, I know Jackson Hinkle has at least read to page 2 of this book, Black Shirts and Reds by Parenti, because he plagiarized the book word for word without crediting Parenti in this tweet. So I gotta wonder if Hinkle isn't basically using Parenti's book as an instruction manual on how to become a successful fascist. But I don't want you to think this is just an individual problem with fail son Hinkle. This isn't about Hinkle as an individual. This entire movement, the American Patriot Socialists, is all about distorting facts and building false narratives to bolster a fake-ass revolution. One radical Marxist group from the past who fake American leftists love to pretend to like would be the Black Panthers. Of course, if the Black Panthers were around today, debate bros like Vosh and the American Patriot Socialists would not get along with them. I'm sure Vosh would dismiss them as tankies who want to commit reverse genocide against white people or some shit. I mean, after all, the Black Panthers were Marxist-Leninists. They were black nationalists. But anyway, we're talking about a different pseudo-leftist Nazgul today, so enough about Vosh. Anyway, one talking point which American Patriot Socialists bring up every so often is the fact that the Black Panthers worked with the Young Patriots, who were Confederate flag-loving good old boys, according to the American Patriot Socialists. See, the case they're trying to build goes something like this. The Panthers were cool and good. Everyone loves the Panthers, and the Panthers were willing to unite with chuds who love the Confederate flag. Therefore, we should unite with MAGA chuds today. But wait, not so fast. Dialectical materialism, the underlying philosophy of Marx and Lenin, whom the AmPatSocs pretend to totally follow and understand, demands that we seek a comprehensive and historical perspective in our analysis of history, human society, and pretty much everything else. Which means we can't just look at a literal snapshot in time and draw any meaningful conclusions from it. We have to dig deeper, and we have to figure out the historical context of photos like these, and we have to try to understand how the Young Patriots developed over time. And if you barely scratch the surface, you'll quickly see that the Black Panthers didn't simply look past the Confederate flags, and the Young Patriots only used those Confederate flags as a symbol for a relatively brief period of time. See, the Young Patriots organization knew even early on that the Confederate flag would alienate many black people, and they even covered it up around them towards the beginning of their relationship with the Black Panthers, as Young Patriot founder Hy Thurman explained in a recent interview. It's also worth noting that the Young Patriots didn't feel that the American flag would start much of a conversation with folks. And this is something that American Patriot Socialists conveniently never mention in their exploitative use of the Young Patriots when they're weaving their narratives. Anyway, over time, as the Young Patriots developed as an organization, largely through working alongside the Black Panthers, they ended up dropping the Confederate flag altogether, realizing that it was a symbol of oppression and bourgeois interests. So we can see that the Young Patriots developed over time through their external relations, working with black revolutionists, and negating internal contradictions, getting rid of white supremacist members and dropping the Confederate flag. None of which the American Patriot Socialists are advocating as they call for us to unite with MAGA. So all of this is extremely dishonest on the part of the American Patriot Socialists. They pretend that this is the story of the Black Panthers uniting with social reactionaries to fight against globalist elites, which, believe me, the Young Patriots and the Black Panthers never talked about the globalist elites. The American Patriot Socialists are taking this small snapshot of a single point in time, a single photo, literally, and constructing an entire fantasy about Black Panthers uniting with chuds, so therefore we should unite with chuds. And this whole fiction runs completely counter to what actually happened in the historical development of the Young Patriots. In reality, the Young Patriots bore no resemblance whatsoever to MAGA fascists of today. The Young Patriots were, from the beginning, Marxists and socialists, not fascists. The Black Panthers didn't unite with the Young Patriots. They worked together on common goals. They had a confederation which they allowed the Young Patriots to join, but the Panthers never tacitly supported or endorsed the usage of Confederate flags by the Young Patriots. They merely tolerated them in the earliest stage of development of the coalition, and the Young Patriots were quite quick to first conceal and then abandon these symbols, the Confederate flag, altogether. Their usage of reactionary Confederate symbols was just a small point in time, one early stage of development in the path and the history of the Young Patriots. So the real lesson here is to not make the same mistakes as the early Young Patriots made. We should drop or never adopt reactionary symbols of bourgeois nationalism. Yet the American Patriot Socialists want to repeat this exact same mistake which the Young Patriots got over, and they, got rid of the stinking bourgeois flags. But the American Patriot Socialists want to do the same thing again. And they use the Young Patriots as like a role model when the Young Patriots didn't want to do that. It's very frustrating the way that they are bending the truth about what actually happened historically with the Young Patriots. It's very upsetting. Let me calm down. We should not make the same mistake of pushing jingoistic, chauvinist symbols and ideology ever, and that's the lesson we should learn from the Young Patriots. Moving on. At the end of the day, all of this manipulation and twisting and warping of reality is just further evidence that American Patriot Socialism is fake. It's a fake socialist movement using fake narratives to build a fake revolution in service to a very real and very dangerous fascist ideological underpinning. So while it's hard for me to take these super dorks seriously, I have to take fascism in all of its forms seriously. And so I had to make this video, even though, again, I don't like talking about this shit at all. And I especially don't like to deal with the hordes of American patriot sycophants who are well known for mass harassment, doxing, and other fascist tactics. My wife Luna and I have already been through it with these fuckers once before. We know that we're gonna probably have to go through the same thing again. And I really don't like giving this clown show any more attention than they already have. As my mama said, you don't water weeds, but their platforms are now larger than mine, and I figure it's time to step up and say something with what little clout I might have, even if I do end up drawing the fire of their sycophants, their sock puppets, and their botnets. I'm prepared for that. This is the most famous inscription in the Temple of Literature. Roughly translated, it means, talented and righteous minds are the driving force of the people. When that driving force is strong, the people are also strong. When that driving force becomes weak, the people become weak. So, moving forward, we have to ask ourselves, are the minds behind the American Patriot Socialist movement talented and righteous? Are they making the driving force of the socialist movement stronger or weaker? You decide.
There are only two holes. Whoa!
I do everything for the clout. You will never see me do something not for the clout.
There are only two holes. Whoa!
My approach is like, be the nice guy, but at the end of the day, it's all a facade.
So you're saying you objectify women on the low? Haas just seems a little
I
cranky.
told you like 3 times on this stream that
Yeah, I can't tell you're being
I'm
honest.
literally engaged in exploiting women for their clout at this point in my life.
There are only two holes. Whoa!
By the end of our relationship, your confidence shattered.
Poop and pee?
Your bank account emptier than it is right now.
The P one.
I will be the one who comes out on top. The real question is whether or not you have followers for me to exploit.
There are only two holes. Whoa!
Well, I wouldn't say I'm a dickhead.
Okay, so what are those holes used for?
A lot of things, like
Burger King.